I'm Ari Goldberg, and today I'm going flying. We chose to come to Brooklyn College today because for this month's For the Record, we wanted to be at the home of one of CUNY's most famous authors.
Barnyardy, little goatee, but nothing crazy. It's a younger cheese.
You had me at barnyardy.
Daddy.
I have to say that it almost feels like my own grandparents' house here, and I'm afraid to touch anything. I'm going to break something.
No, everything that could be broken has been broken.
That's right, Morty.
Along with a fantastic new list of CUNY stories for you, we also have a fantastic new co-host. There are a lot of ways to learn about physics. This is probably the best one. From the buzzing beehives here at Macaulay Honors College, I'm Ari Goldberg for Urban U. From the stage combat course here at the Barrel Group with Ron Peretti, I'm Ari Goldberg for Arts in the City. He actually did hit me there.
Sorry.
That's I'm okay.
The chime you're hearing is the clock tower atop the Rosenthal Library at Queens College. Dedicated in 1989, it is furnished with massive bells delivered all the way from the Netherlands, some weighing over 3,000 pounds. But this isn't so much a story about the structure itself, as it is a story about its namesake. This tower is the Cheney Goodman Schwerner Memorial Clock Tower. In the summer of 1964, 3 young men were volunteering in Mississippi: James Cheney, black, and Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, both Jewish. Goodman was a student here at Queens College, and the 3 of them were working together for the Freedom Summer Campaign, a civil rights drive aiming to register black voters in the deeply segregated state. Unsurprisingly, the Freedom Summer movement and its volunteers were not well received within the context of the state and local laws enforcing racial segregation in Mississippi, the Jim Crow laws of the South. Over the course of the summer, dozens of black-owned businesses, homes, and churches were attacked, and over 1,000 people were arrested. Scores ended up beaten, and several were murdered. Much of this, tragically, never made much of a stir in the national news. But when Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner disappeared, the national spotlight, no doubt due in part to there now being 2 white victims, shined brightly on Neshoba County, Mississippi. The trio was abducted and shot on June 21, 1964, by members of both the police and the Ku Klux Klan. Their bodies wouldn't be found for 2 months. Schwerner was 24 years old, Cheney 21, and Goodman a mere 20 years old. Of the 18 accused of the crime, only 7 saw minor jail time back then. It would take 41 years and a very different world for an 8th perpetrator to finally be meaningfully convicted and imprisoned. But while the criminals may have been shielded from justice by Jim Crow courts, Jim Crow itself would not long be shielded from justice. In the aftermath, national attention to racial injustice would only grow, and in July 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed. In the decades since, the 3 young activists' legacies have been honored in everything from film,
I'm telling you, Tillman, there are 3 dead kids out there somewhere and a lot of scared people.
music,
I think of Andy in the cold, wet clay. Those 3 are on my mind.
a speech by Martin Luther King Jr. at Queens College, and of course, monuments, like the clock tower here on campus. Of course, their heroism was no more or less than any of the civil rights activists of the day who risked their lives. But by their sacrifice, their legacy stands as a great symbol, beyond just as individuals. Their legacy is one of a cause, an ideal for the nation. And in 2014, that ideal was recognized with the nation's highest honor, when President Barack Obama posthumously awarded James Cheney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner with the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
James, Andrew, and Michael could not have known the impact they would have on the civil rights movement or on future generations. And here today, inspired by their sacrifice, we continue to fight for the ideals of equality and justice for which they gave their lives.
For the record, I'm Ari Goldberg.
As a matter of fact, I became a comedian. People don't know this because I was always very self-conscious. I always was. I am to this day. I was once so self-conscious that if I even went to a football game, if I saw the players get into a huddle, I used to think that they were talking about me.
In the classic tradition of old Jews telling jokes, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better archetype than Jackie Mason. With his recent passing just this year, at the age of 93, the comedy world lost one of the last titans of Borscht Belt humor. Nowadays, the Borscht Belt is probably most recognizable to many audiences as the setting for several episodes of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
My first everything happened in the Catskills. Everything.
But from the early parts of the 20th century, through its heyday in the late 50s and early 60s, hotels and resorts a few hours north of the city became the summer getaway destination for much of New York City's Jewish population, and as such, Jewish entertainers. Comedians particularly. And even if you've never heard of the Borscht Belt before, you've certainly heard of some of the icons who got their start there. Mel Brooks, Rodney Dangerfield, Joan Rivers, Woody Allen, Lenny Bruce, Sid Caesar, Don Rickles, Jerry Lewis. The list goes on. And Jackie Mason, born Yaakov Moshe HaKohen Maza, probably had the deepest Jewish roots of all of them. After graduating from City College in 1953, he became an ordained rabbi in a long line of family rabbis, stretching back to his father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-great-grandfather. But a funny thing happened while leading his congregation. He found that people would start coming just to hear him tell jokes during his sermons. He would soon leave the synagogue and began performing stand-up at Borscht Belt hotels and New York City nightclubs, honing his trademark style, fingers gesticulating, making often exasperated everyman observations, rapid-fire delivery, self-deprecating, and often deprecating to the audience, too. His first big break was on The Steve Allen Show in 1962, and he would go on to greater fame on The Ed Sullivan Show, never losing his thick Yiddish accent, refusing talent agency advice to take speech lessons. After a falling out with Ed Sullivan, Mason's star would wane until the 80s, when he burst back into prominence with a wildly successful one-man Broadway show, The World According to Me, winning a special Tony Award.
Thank you.
And for the last 3 decades, he would famously be a recurring guest on The Simpsons, winning an Emmy for voicing Krusty the Clown's rabbi father.
Excuse us, Rabbi Kristofsky?
So, what can I do for you, my young friend?
We came to talk to you about your son.
I have no son!
Oh, great. We came all this way and it's the wrong guy.
I didn't mean that literally.
As always, it's hard to separate art from artist, especially in the realm of comedy, where often the line between joke and vitriol is blurry. But suffice to say, his later years weren't without controversy, having called both former NYC Mayor David Dinkins and Barack Obama a Yiddish slur. And his opinionated commentary often took on a darker, hardline political tone over the last decade. For however his latter-day statements or political views do or don't color his career in retrospect, his place in history purely as a comedy legend is undeniable, having landed at number 63 on Comedy Central Presents The 100 Greatest Stand-Ups of All Time.
Thank God that I'm such a hit. I desperately appreciate it. To me, it's the most fantastic thing in the world, and I deserve every minute of it.
For the record, I'm Ari Goldberg.